This show is produced by the Hartman Media Company. For more information and links to all our great podcasts, visit hartmanmedia.com.
The last few months have affirmed something you said years ago that was just so true, and I don't think people appreciated it at the time, is that the mortgage is an asset. But now, given where interest rates are now, to think, oh man, I got this sub 3% mortgage. Why would I ever sell? It's tremendous. It's much more valuable than the house itself.
Welcome to the Creating Wealth Show with Jason Hartman. You're about to learn a new slant on investing, some exciting techniques, and fresh new approaches to the world's most historically proven asset class that will enable you to create more wealth and freedom than you ever thought possible. Jason is a genuine self-made multimillionaire who's actually been there and done it. He's a successful investor, lender, developer, and entrepreneur who's owned properties in 11 states, had hundreds of tenants, and been involved in thousands of real estate transactions. This program will help you follow in Jason's footsteps on the road to your financial independence day. You really can do it. And now, here's your host, Jason Hartman, with the complete solution for real estate investors.
Welcome to episode 2186, and today we've got part 2 with Ivor Cummins. And I'm going to talk to you about something important on that last episode here in just a second. But after trying to do business for about 2.5 hours in Europe today, doing a simple task that should be relatively easy. And, you know, when you do business in Europe and many other places, there's a lot of roadblocks. This is the one thing the U.S. is really good at. It's good at money. It's good at business. And, that just makes life a lot easier in so many ways. Now, granted, the U.S. is bad at a lot of things. The food supply is certainly poison in the U.S. The political environment is becoming an epic, corrupt disaster in the United States. But business, it's still open for business. And doing business in the U.S. is pretty darn convenient. And it reminded me of that famous line from the movie Wall Street where Gordon Gekko originally, many years ago, said greed is good. And that's kind of the thing. When you do business, you want the other party you're doing business with to be greedy. That's helpful. It's helpful to you that they're greedy because they're motivated. They want money. They want to make things happen. And that's why Gordon Gekko was right to an extent that greed is good. All right, so before we get to Ivor Cummins, let's talk about a couple of things today. Morgan Stanley argues that U.S. homeowners are the strong hands in this cycle. We talked about this before, and again, I think this is so true. The homeowners are in such good shape. All of those crash bros out there waiting for the crash that just never seems to come. Wow. It's just really true. Rapidly deteriorating affordability has already caused significant decreases in housing activity. In fact, we got some new news about that today. Sales volume is really down. Inventory is picking up a bit more. We've got some higher inventory numbers, but still we are way off the mark in terms of being in any sort of market where inventory is historically high. It's still historically low. And we look at the number of mortgage-free homeowners, and those mortgage-free homeowners are very significant. 39% of the U.S. housing market is mortgage-free, and the vast majority of the rest of them have very low mortgage rates. What about foreclosure activity? So here's another way to lie with statistics. If you're watching on video, you see this chart. You see that the Great Recession had very high foreclosure activity, as we've talked about many times. And then we look at the COVID era, where it was way down. But we look now and we see that compared to the COVID era, foreclosure activity is up by more than triple that very historically low point. But doesn't that make a great headline when you say foreclosure activity has more than tripled? And it's true. but it's tripled compared to nothing. It's what is this number? It's like less than 1/10 of what it was during the Great Recession. So again, foreclosure moratoriums during the COVID era made it pretty much non-existent, but it is still extremely, extremely low. So again, if you're in the foreclosure business, which that's a cottage industry part of the real estate industry overall, there's just no business to be had. There's nothing going on. There's nothing going on, folks. Nothing at all. Okay, be sure to join us for our monthly Wednesday Zoom meetings, jasonhartman.com/Wednesday. That's jasonhartman.com/Wednesday for our free monthly masterclass. We look forward to seeing you there. This next one is going to be a good one. We've got a totally new guest that you've never heard before in our network who will be on with us, a very renowned and accomplished lawyer and tax advisor. So I think you're really going to like this next Wednesday meeting, our next Wednesday masterclass, jasonhartman.com/Wednesday. All right. Our YouTube video from 2 days ago was taken down. It was removed by the people who think they know more than you, the elites who at other times in history would be criminally prosecuted. They would be the scourge of society because they are essentially running re-education camps. I mean, Stalin ran re-education camps. Chairman Mao ran re-education camps. And now YouTube is running them. Look at this. If you're watching on the screen, they took my video down. I got a notice that it was taken down because it was misleading. So apparently the people that decide better than you, the people that know better than you, what is true and what is false, although they don't ever tell you what was misleading. They just say their community guidelines were not followed. So they said that my options are either I can take a training class. Yes, a training class. You're seeing this on the screen. This is a screenshot from the folks at you. Okay, the re-education camp that they're running. Okay, you have to complete a short training with a 7-question test. If you violate this policy again within 90 days, you will get a strike. If you violate a different policy, you'll get a warning. Oh, that's so generous of them. Wow, I guess they're going to let me survive if I go to the re-education camp. You know, if I get sent away. Did that happen to Jack Ma? Yeah, that's what we're all wondering, okay? And then you can still decide later to appeal. Oh, you do get to appeal, but you get to appeal to their secret mystery star chamber where there's no due process. There's no governmental oversight. In fact, there's no oversight by anybody, just these criminals that think they know better than all of us, than all of you. That's who's running things. Remember, you can never evaluate what you can't see and what you can't hear. And that's what they're doing. They're creating memory holes in history so they can decide what you get to think and believe. These are the thought police. These are exactly what Orwell told us about when he wrote the book back in 1948 called 1984. Wow. Scary stuff, folks. Scary stuff. So what is a conspiracy theorist? Well, it's nothing but a derogatory term for a person who researches a subject and then uses logic and critical thinking to form an educated opinion instead of just blindly believing whatever they see on their television. Think about that. You know, memes, a short meme can really convey a lot of meaning in a short thing. Let's see if this video gets to stay up. Here's Ivor Cummins. And you know that Apple, another disgusting company, they have a patent on a feature that they can turn on at any time on all iPhones that can shut off their ability to record video. So if you want to record a video of, say, the police doing something bad, they can shut off your video camera remotely. They did this in China, in Hong Kong with the protests there, where people could not use AirDrop because AirDrop, since it's peer-to-peer on the iPhone, was the only way for them to get around the CCP's censorship, where they could share files and share photos and share videos with one another via AirDrop. And Apple, is a pawn for the CCP. So they shut that feature off. Can you imagine the number of people who literally died, who got killed by the CCP or imprisoned because of Apple not allowing people to use AirDrop? They turned the feature off. I mean, these companies are just pure evil. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, and it's very hard for the average person to even know any of what we're saying, because the censorship also works to stop people being aware that there is censorship.
Yeah.
And they know this. They know this. Well, I was using WeTransfer, which are a very independent company, and I don't think they ever interfered. But Dropbox was one of the first and the worst where I noticed this.
Right.
And Google Drive, I'd expect it. But Dropbox, I thought, was a bit more independent company. But no, they were shocking. They were terrible.
Yeah.
They were
think of the way this is controlled, right? If you want to receive venture capital, if you want to go public, if you want to grow your tech company, if you want to get an angel group to invest in your company, they're all just controlled by the woke mob. It's unbelievable. It's amazing how successful these campaigns have been amongst the elites. It's really unbelievable.
Well, the beauty of it is that Larry Fink, of course, was ruthlessly imposing not only ESG, so you only get money if you avoid coal and real fuel, and you get money if you make silly windmills and solar things. Not only was he doing that, but he was ramming DEI down their throat, diversity, equality, inclusion, which is part of their strategy too.
Sure.
To emasculate society. But of course, Larry Fink is a top trustee of the WEF. I mean, you don't need to go far to join the dots here.
Right.
They are using that to fully transform all of the so-called free market capitalism into an utterly bound in chains system that can no longer do the right thing. All the companies are in chains because of access to capital.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's a tough
capital, not just capital, but advertising, of course, public relations. They'll be blackballed if they do something that's outside of the narrative,
Well, that's it. But the next just goes from that Rand Global Risks to the Global Brains Trust. They took advantage of the great financial crash, and the World Economic Forum jumped in immediately, made a global council, 70 global councils with 1,500 global experts to reset our whole international system of governance. So they jumped on a crisis yet again. They even had, Putin in there. That was back when things were less problematic with him.
Yeah.
But Kissinger in 2009...
He used to be in the club.
Well, interestingly, I interviewed Alex Traynor on the whole Putin, Russia and the West. But the West hates Russia, the top guys, and they want to strip mine it for its resources, and they want to take it out as a competitor. But Putin and Russia tried to join the UN and tried to stay friendly because they were worried about the power of these Western elites. And they tried, but they were not let join, of course, because they had to be the enemy in the future. They were the new Cold War enemy. So they never got to get in. They kind of got into WEF and they got to shake hands with Klaus. But at the end of the day, the Western lot know that these guys, we want to get rid of the Russians and we want to take all their minerals, resources. We want to make a mess of them like we did with all the other countries.
I want to just recommend one more book. I interviewed the author of a book. I believe he was with the New York Times. I mean, he's really left-leaning, okay? But it's interesting. He wrote a book called Davos Man. Peter Goodman, he's been on my show.
Oh, Krugman.
And we did 2 shows with Peter Goodman, the author of Davos Man, and he just shows the incredible hypocrisy going on. It was a really interesting interview. And even some people on the other side of the aisle are really awake to this stuff.
Yeah, there's positive signs that there's a lot of kind of so-called left-wing liberals that are now being called right-wing, libertarians, because they're beginning to realize, hold on a minute, I was in love with an idea that I thought was a nice idea. Now I see it hijacked and it's heading into totalitarianism. I'm out, which is great to see.
Right,
but
it is good. Yeah,
it's good to see. It's positive. And Kissinger in the New York Times 2009 writes a big piece, and we're accused of conspiracy theory, or we get a YouTube demonetized if we say New World Order, because officially YouTube puts on a warning that Wikipedia says New World Order is a conspiracy theory. But Kissinger in 2009 wrote an article in the New York Times, a big one, and the title was The Chance for a New World Order. And he says all this stuff, right? But they call it a conspiracy theory. And he's banging on
about... George Bush Sr. said it a long time ago.
Yeah.
I mean, around 1990, he talked about the New World Order. So this is not a secret, folks.
Well, the beauty is that the first mention I know of is in 1956, the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, who started the whole thing, working with the State Department, CIA, etc. And they said the phrase, we need to create a new world order in all its aspects, spiritual, financial, governmental, etc. They said it first. It's real. But Kissinger in the Times is hilarious because he's banging on about common fears that are global. Jihadist terrorism. Remember, they got a lot of ground with that one? They got the Patriot Act. They got a lot of nasty laws in on the back of the fear of jihadists.
I cannot believe how difficult banking has become since 9/11. It's insane. Absolutely... Banking is now a nightmare. It's like a whole nother job. I always thought of banks as being just the infrastructure. It's in the background. I don't think about my banking for my businesses. Now I spend monumental amounts of time on banking. What should just be infrastructure in the background, right? So I can focus on business. But yeah, banking,
unfortunately, there are some who would argue that above Rockefeller and above who we define as the kingpins, because we need to pick some strata that's published. We got to be careful talking about Rothschilds and Wagners and big banking families, but a lot would say that the central banking system is actually at the higher level.
Sure.
The huge banking families, but we can't prove it. So, but
again, my statement isn't about the central bankers and the Rothschilds and so forth that probably have a net worth over $200 trillion. Some say. I mean, just they're so rich, it's insane, that family. But it's really just about the 9/11, the Patriot Act, the KYC. That's like a much lower level issue. But I just wanted to make that clear. Yeah. But you're right. That's certainly we can talk about the Federal Reserve and all the central banks of the world
and the Fed.
That's another discussion.
Well, true, but no, you're absolutely right. And all of that difficulty for ordinary people that they create takes power from ordinary people. It ties them up in knots. Yeah. And the big boys, they have none of that problem. They just pick up the phone and everything is done. Right. So it's another way of subjugating the people. But you have the G20 came out of the G9. Most leaders of G20 are prior young global leaders. So you can see how this works. They're creating the structures. And they set up a World Economic Forum grassroots network. So they actually were clever. And they said, hey, all these internet influencers might be telling the truth if we run a pandemic. So they got in 14,000 members, 480 hubs in 150 countries, under the age of 30 big internet influencers. And you could only get into the World Economic Forum influencers group if you're introduced by another influencer or you were a member already. So very careful not to have any moles. But the global shapers community, huge. And that's why when COVID blew, all these big influencers were screaming about saving granny and hiding under the bed. Because they've been worked on for over 10 years. Not rocket science.
Yeah.
Loads of money. And we'll skip Rockefeller Lockstep 2010, but they published everything in the scenario in 2010, a carbon copy of what happened in 2020 when this nonsense flu hit. They wrote it all. Authoritarian governments would have to smash down. People would have to be locked down. They would accept it because of the fear that they had for the pandemic. They were correct. And they wrote it all down in 2010. Still on the web. You still download it and read it. Carbon copy of 2020, what happened. So these guys are well planned, And I think we're wrapping up with the story. I don't know if we have time to get to the positive, but it ends with public-private partnership. Klaus Schwab came out with a big publication, 2015. The time has come for a new stakeholder paradigm of international governance. And what he's selling is, of course, fascism, because he's selling the merger of corporate and state power, which is, as Mussolini defined it correctly, fascism. So he's selling fascism. We have UN Global Goals, the Fourth Industrial Revolution book from Schwab in 16, going on about altering the human and space surveillance technology, always the same stuff. And then in 19, the WF and the UN sign a partnership. Biggest thing that happened in the last 100 years. No media covered it. But the WF is going to use all their corporate funders to fund the 2030 goals. And that's when we had the pandemic then, right on cue, censorship, and all of this 2030 nonsense, right? Climate change, trans, gender, right? Education, health, pandemics, vaccine passports, digital IDs, all the stuff they want for the nice little ant farm. So that's kind of the end of
by the way, you've
history.
got Rousseau there,
Oh.
and he passed away, but a friend of mine, he was his uncle. So I heard some inside stories about Rousseau, and that was really interesting. Okay, are you ready now to switch gears and take us to the action steps, Ivor? People might be feeling hopeless and helpless here. What do we do about this? How do we fight
Right.
that?
Well, very final thing is Event 201 in October 2019, World Economic Forum, Bill and Melinda do a huge simulation of, guess what? A future coronavirus pandemic. And that was October 19. So that's just a funny thing because they knew it had come out in the summer of 19 in China, and they knew they were going to scam this in 2020. But yeah, let's get on. Now, we might skip the root cause diagram of all their strategies because, I go to the very end to speed things up. I won't work through it, and I won't go through the cartoons. I will show, though, for people watching, here's Carl Stenz, the head of the Bank of International Settlement.
When I had an interview with Catherine Austin Fitts on the show again recently, we played his videos. So that was interesting when he shared the stage at that conference recently. I know who this guy is. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
what did he say? Tell the audience what he said.
He basically said, and it's hard to do the accent, but he said, right now, we do not know if 10 peso is spent or $100. We do not see that transaction. But with CBDC, we will see every peso, every dollar, exactly as it is transacted. We can see every transaction. And he said, we also have the technology to intervene on any transaction. At the moment it's being transacted, we have that technology. So for them, the excitement at the C in CBDC, central, they have control. So when your card is declined, you won't even know who to complain to.
And so what he's talking about, folks, is central bank digital currencies, the digital currency controlled by the central bank. And, the thought is, probably very realistically, that it will become attached to some kind of social scoring system. And if there are lockdowns for climate or lockdowns for another pandemic or whatever, they could control what time of day you can spend. If you post something on social media, maybe you can't spend on your internet access, so you lose internet access. Maybe you lose the ability to spend your central bank digital currency on cellular phone bills, so you'll lose that access. I mean, this is so scary. When I interviewed G. Edward Griffin again recently, the author of The Creature from Jekyll Island, I asked him that question. I said, what do we do about this? And he said, Jason, it cannot happen. We cannot let this happen because this will literally be checkmate. He didn't say checkmate. That's my word, because I used to say that 25 years ago when the fear then was a global fiat currency, non-digital, right? But with digital capability, it would be so much more powerful for them and so much more oppressive for us.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree. I don't like to be negative when I'm talking to the people, but if they get CBDC, we're in such serious trouble. Even I don't know if we can have a lot of hope. It is that serious. It's more serious than anything else that was done or will be done, including wars in the next few years. CBDC is an end game type phenomenon that we cannot let happen. And
it's checkmate.
It kind of is, because at the moment, Nigel Farage in the UK and anyone who they don't like, they can suddenly get debanked. But you can go to your bank, and yes, they won't explain exactly why, but you can go to your bank. But with CBDC, some bureaucrats in a room somewhere on the planet will decide your transaction's not going to work.
Wow.
Who do you even go to?
Yeah.
I mean, what do? Ring the central bank helpline?
Right.
Good luck with that. Yeah. It'll take you months to even find out why your card's not working.
It's hard enough dealing with your own bank or credit card company. Can you imagine this? Yeah.
Absolutely. So super fast to get to the more positive thing. I just have this diagram and the link you mentioned, they can see it all being gone through. But essentially, COVID-19 program, I call it, because it was a program. It was not really a disease. It was a program. Gender and all this trans nonsense, climate and CO2 we touched on, financial CBDC we touched on, education and the Marxist takeover of the universities the last few decades, and mass migration we're seeing all over Europe and, of course, in America with Biden, and anti-meat propaganda and the war on farmers that started in earnest, particularly in Europe. All of these things are all parallel synergistic strategies. They all weaken society, which is the main goal, and they all deliver other things towards the globalist world government. And it just puts on one page all these strategies that seem to a an uneducated person to be all too different to be all part of one thing. But they are. It's classic corporate, multi-stranded, strategic program management. And when you see it all in the sheet, you can see it for what it is. That's pretty much the super fast version.
Right.
And war. Unfortunately, we're going to be dealing with even more war than we've seen the last couple of years, because the State Department, CIA, and the global elite need a lot of war to progress their goals and to distract the people. It's just a reality, and create more inflation and maybe
more inflation that is the liar and the thief and the pickpocket that is stealing the wealth of most people, especially the poor and the lower and the middle class. It's hollowing the middle class out. Yes. That's what inflation does. If you're in the upper middle or the elite class, you own real estate. You own it with long-term mortgage debt that gets debased by inflation. So you're moving ahead while all the others are falling behind.
They're literally, they are sucking us dry and pouring the money into their nefarious, goals. It's quite disgusting. But most people don't understand inflation, and they actually blame Putin for the inflation that they had created 2 years before.
They created it long before that. That's starting in 1971, starting in 1913 with the Federal Reserve, I'll say.
Absolutely. And that's a big story that people, of course, should certainly look up and understand. But as you say, the Jekyll Island book and that gentleman, excellent place to start on understanding this. So they do all this with nonsense narratives. And the funny thing is, Stalin used the motherland narrative to get the people with him, even though he's a totalitarian. But it was a real narrative about the Russians' love of the motherland. And Adolf used the fatherland and the kind of under the surface racism that was in Germany. He used real phenomena to get the people with him. The irony is that the latest totalitarians we've discussed, for the modern population, it seems that the narratives they best can deploy are nonsense. So all the narratives, from the bad cold that supposedly was the bubonic plague, the trans sex inversion nonsense, right? The CO2 and global warming science, we won't get into detail. It's so laughable when I looked into it and interviewed some professors. It's comical. And I could go on. They actually use nonsense to fool the people. So people should think about that and feel very offended that the narratives today to bring in totalitarianism are actually nonsense. That's what works for them. So it's something to think about. Counter narratives are everything. There's a lot of positive things happening. I mean, Jim Ferguson here on the screen, he shared that Pierre Poilievre, I'm not sure if I pronounced that, Conservative Party leader, not only are they not censoring talk of WEF now, he came out publicly and said no members of parliament will he allow to be a member of the WEF, and there will be no mandatory digital ID, no CBDC. So however committed they are, I'm not sure, but they are now publicly saying we are not going to do this. And I think that's a big deal, because they used to censor even talking about it. And we had Japan rising against the WHO pandemic treaty. And Japanese are not big protesters, but they had thousands of people out. We had a senior Japanese member of government who's come out and said he's injured by the V, right? And Japan, quiet Japan, is pushing back in a big way. We had the Road to Geneva, big rally on June the 1st there. And a lot of heavy hitters went to Geneva and protested. And the police tried to corral them and stop their buses, but there's a huge amount going on, and I think, and finally, the Heart Group, the Health Freedom Defence Fund, Australians for Science and Freedom, Rational Ground, Pandata in South Africa, so many organisations working now that were not there 2 years ago or 3 years ago during COVID. Now we have tons of great organisations producing material, and we need to support them to help us in the long run, I think.
Okay, so supporting these organizations, any advice on supporting them? Where can we just find them, look them up, donate to them, attend their events and so forth? Is that the message? I
would say, any and all of that. I mean, in Istanbul tomorrow, I realize I meant to bring a list of all the organizations. I'm going to have to go digging. It's late in the day. But I showed some there. The RFK Jr., I think, the Heart Group in the UK, Australians for Science and Freedom. So I don't have a ready-to-hand resource, though maybe when you're publishing this, I will have a link to what I put together of all of them, and pick your favorites, watch their videos, get to know them a little, Pick the ones you think are being most effective, and yes, support their subscription, support their events. So many ways, because you need to get the message out as an individual, but it can be hard and your reach can be limited. So one good way is to support an organization that has more clout and more reach. And we even saw, just showing on the screen now, in Florida just the other day in Lee County, the Republican Assembly passed a resolution calling the UN, the WHO, and the WEF terrorist organizations.
I saw that. I thought that was fantastic.
And I mean, what was brilliant for me was, now it's not going to be let go to the very end and get ratified, because there'll be a panic and phone calls will be made. It'll be stopped. But the fact that they have clearly and accurately identified the problem, the source of our evil in the world, UN, WHO, WEF, that's it. So they know, which is fantastic. A couple of years ago in COVID, no one knew anything about these.
Yeah. And, I think it's fair to say on balance, though, these organizations aren't entirely bad. It's just that they're being used, and certain people in those organizations have taken control, and now they're doing bad things. I mean, maybe you can liken it to this idea. It seems like every person we support, as a government leader like Saddam or Osama, or whatever, right? You let a couple decades go by and they become our enemy. Right. Yeah. So, that's kind of what happens. These things, they're dynamic, they're moving targets. Right. So saying they're all bad or all good, you can never do that. Right. They do some good things, and that gives them the window dressing. Right.
Yeah. And it's a fair point. And as you grow an organization, you cannot grow it as totally evil, because it won't work.
Yeah. So it'll never be able to grow. Right. I mean,
exactly.
Even look at like the Nazis or any dictator that's come to power. Right. They all came to power under the guise of a good message of some sort.
Of course.
Right? Yeah.
But the key thing is, Rockefeller is the origin of UN, WHO, and WEF. Clearly, we've gone through that, and people of that ilk. So they grow an organization that talks nice, but when the time comes, you make sure that the leadership is in your pocket, and then they begin to clench their iron fist. So like Tedros and WHO, you get the guy in who will use that organization and run it with an iron fist. And he effectively has full veto in the WHO. You put in your Tedros, he can overrule the full council, scientific council, on whether an issue is an international issue of major concern.
One person should not have that much power.
But it's by design. The WHO was designed with absolute immunity from any prosecution for its members. And the UN and WHO, I'm almost 100% certain, no European police force can enter any of their grounds or buildings in a criminal investigation. Their initial charter carefully put in that they have full immunity and protection. And you ask, why did they do that? Because they knew someday it was going to get pretty hot.
They view themselves like an embassy. I mean, that's just insane. Crazy. Yeah. Okay, so let's wrap it up. I mean, we could go longer on this, but let's just bring it to a fine point, though. So action steps, any recap on that, or anything else you want to say?
Yeah, I had a list here, actually, which I didn't put in my talk the other day. But basically, create and propagate counter-narratives against this nonsense. And the good thing is, for anyone scientific or data-centric, because they use nonsense that's easily debunked, it does make our job easier in principle. The problem is we're censored. But they are easy to debunk because they're using nonsense. But supporting the various freedom groups is probably better for the ordinary person, because the freedom groups like Heart in England are producing all the scientific reports referenced that debunk the nonsense. And they can do it much better than an individual. So like we said, and then live the counter-narrative. Now, this is not going to change the world, just you living the counter-narrative. But it's important if more and more people do it. Buy local, locally produced as much as possible. Support local food producers and farmers as the bad guys are attacking them. Support them. Use cash as often as you can. Keep cash alive and in circulation. Make it very hard for them to try and take it out. And prepare contingencies. In fairness, physical gold for some of your wealth in your own possession, a large stock, who knows, with the wars coming down the track in the next few years, a large stock of tin goods that are good for 4 or 5 years, unrefrigerated. No harm doing it. And, use FIFO, first in, first out. So eat the stuff constantly from the front end and replenish. So don't just all leave it there for years and then throw it out if there's no disaster. Use it as a buffer of long-term stored food, just in case. Same with water. Network like hell, that's huge. In spite of censorship, make real world networks, get with people who understand what's going on, join forces, network.
And have a community. And, this is going to air on my Holistic Survival show, but some of my other shows as well. And, what I realized after doing over 250 interviews of preppers and so forth is that this stuff can become kind of a sickness where people make it a lifestyle. And all I say is this: prepping is responsible. It's an item on your to-do list. You get it done. You cycle the food, first in, first out, FIFO, right? But here's the thing. The area I noticed all these preppers miss is communication. When you talk about building a community, your cell phone can be monitored and censored and will not work in a natural disaster, very likely. Yeah. So I recommend everybody get themselves two-way family radio systems. They're very cheap. And then also get a ham radio, but do not get a license. And do not use it because you can't legally use it without a license in the US. I don't know what the worldwide laws are, but you are legally allowed to use it in case of emergency, even without a license. And the reason I say don't get a license is because when you get a ham radio license, you give the government a preemptive search warrant to come and inspect your equipment anytime they want.
Ooh.
And you do not want to give a preemptive search warrant. Okay. That's why you should not get a license. I was, going to get my ham radio license and I decided not to because of that. I have a ham radio. I do not use it, but in case of emergency, I will use it and I can legally do that.
Yeah, that's great advice. And yeah, my brother actually has a license, but from way before any of this, 25 years ago. So he happens to have one. But if I got one, and at some point I probably will, that's good advice. There's no need for a license. And he can show me all the ropes and just leave it there for when there's a real problem, in which case you're legally allowed to use it anyway.
Absolutely.
Yeah. No, excellent. And you're absolutely right. You don't want to get into this living like a prepper. I mean, right. I'm all over the world at conferences. I'm working 7 days a week. I'm completely in the real world. I'm a hardcore engineer, practical, stoical type person. I'm nothing like a prepper. Right. But yeah, I'm dollar cost averaging into buying these foods because it's common sense. I mean, it's so easy to do.
It's an inflation hedge too.
It is also, and you know what? The Deputy Prime Minister in the UK a week or two ago, actually in a major newspapers, came out and told people because of a risk of war with Russia, they should be stocking up, I don't know, a week's food and water.
Yeah.
So he's told the ant people. And I heard from good authority that NATO advised the government people should be thinking of months of food in Europe and water.
Yeah.
And the government in England apparently said, we can't say that. So they came out and said 3 days or 6 days.
Right.
So even they're lying to the people because technically the word to them was you'd want months, but they won't say it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So look, in your prepping plans, remember the threes, okay? You can survive without oxygen for 3 minutes. You can survive without water for 3 days. You can survive without food for 3 weeks. Once you get past 3 weeks, everybody else is going to be gone who didn't prep. Okay. So you're going to have the world's resources at your disposal at that point. So really, that's the way you do it. And
just one other kind of sinister or somber note, as it happens, since I was 17, when I got my first guns, I went shooting my whole life. I know it's common in America, not so much in Ireland, but the reality is if there's a major problem, let's be honest, it won't be the army you're worried about. They'll be busy. If you're tucked in some corner of the country and you have plenty of supplies, you'll have to worry about marauders who are in the difficult position of not having enough food. And in those extreme circumstances, I just suggest it'd be no harm having the ability to defend yourself, shall we say.
Right. Absolutely. Okay. So network like crazy, get political. Anything else you want to wrap up with on this?
Well, just to get political, I think I shunned politics for 20 years. I don't even look at news updates on politicians because they disgust me. In the last 20, 30 years, there were statesmen and stateswomen 30, 40, 50 years ago. That was different. Right. But the current crop are junk. Clearly, self-interested junk. But the reality is now that all the political positions, particularly in Ireland, and I guess all over, do have power in those political roles. And they are infested with puppeticians and WEF kind of puppets, meat puppets. So we do, as a society, need to begin to just take on getting some real decent people into this quagmire that is politics. because otherwise we let them have the conch. And that's happening in Ireland. I won't get into detail, we're over time, but we have independent Ireland groups set up. I've worked with them over the last few years, and we're getting more and more candidates going for actual positions. And the time is now to do that. There is no avoiding it, because I think my last slide was Plato said, the price good men pay for indifference to politics and public affairs is to be ruled by evil men. And that's exactly where we are.
People get the government they deserve. And
yes.
That's good or bad. Take it for what it's worth. Ivor, thank you for joining us today. Go ahead and give out a website or whatever you like.
Oh, we'll be really quick, Jason. Just search engine Ivor Cummins and you'll hit my YouTube, my main outlet, and my Twitter @FatEmperor handle. I'm on Facebook and LinkedIn too, but to be honest, YouTube and Twitter are the main places I play.
As long as YouTube will allow you to be there.
Oh, I'm self-censoring. I have bleeps in my videos now, but it's getting pretty tough, all right.
Yeah, it sure is. All right, Ivor. Ivor Cummins, thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much, Jason. Next time. Bye now.
Thank you so much for listening. Please be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss any episodes. Be sure to check out the show's specific website and our general website, hartmanmedia.com, for appropriate disclaimers and terms of service. Remember that guest opinions are their own, and if you require specific legal or tax advice or advice in any other specialized area, please consult an appropriate professional. And we also very much appreciate you reviewing the show. Please go to iTunes or Stitcher Radio or whatever platform you're using and write a review for the show. We would very much appreciate that. And be sure to make it official and subscribe so you do not miss any episodes. We look forward to seeing you on the next episode.